Alrighty, so we are going to take a look at lighting today. We're kind of wrapping up the semester here. Next milestone is going to be due next Friday, so the stuff we talked about, was it last week, I think? Yeah, we're going to see what we can do about updating that for next time, and then milestone 5 is going to be kind of a post-mortem. So like after a project's finished, you kind of reflect and be like, what worked, what didn't, what can I improve on next time, process of making stuff, whatnot. And then another part of it is what you thought of the class. This has kind of changed over the last couple years, last couple semesters, so it's probably going to change again a little bit next semester. If there are things that you would, let's say if you took it again or somebody else is taking it, what would you like to see in that class? If you took this again, you're like, hey, I actually want to learn more about this. So that's going to be milestone 5. So y'all can do that whenever you want. I'll put up details for that a little bit later, maybe today or this weekend. But back to lighting. Lighting is a challenging task. It is no easy feat. If you have any sort of real-world lighting experience, this definitely helps. I'm going to go ahead and create a new empty level, right? So we just kind of start from scratch, right? So there's absolutely nothing here in the world outliner over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a plane. I'm going to scale it up a little bit. Move it over here. Okay. And then I'm going to add, a couple of other props. All right. There we go. I'll make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so if I go into unlit mode, right, I can just see my shapes. I don't have any lighting in here whatsoever. Let's throw in a cone for good measure, I guess. Yeah, I don't have any sorts of lighting information in here, so I can't see anything when I'm in regular lit mode. But you have these other options here, right? Let's do a cylinder too, might as well. So you've got your scene, right? You've kind of have the default lighting in, the one where you go like default lighting and whatnot. So they usually start with some sort of a main light or directional light. So that's your sun, moon, the dominant light force that's in the scene. If you go over here to the modes panel on the left side, right, we have the lights tab right here. So John, we have the lights tab right here. And we have direction light, point light, spotlight, skylight, and then there's kind of an area light that's a little bit newer. So it's something coming in from like a window or whatnot. So I want to drag a directional light into the scene. Kind of move it over here. See, when I rotate it, the shadows will kind of move around, right? Kind of update. And then you'll see something that says like preview down here because the lighting has not been built or baked. So these shadows are really dark, right? It's really hard to see anything right now if it's in the shadow, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add one of these skylights into the scene. All right. Drag this in. And this is what kind of bounces lighting around the map. So it'll take in information over here. So you can say, hey, I want you to capture like the colors in the scene and kind of the sky and kind of bounce them around. Or you can give it a cube map. which is basically just a special texture. It'll usually say something like HDRI, which is like high definition rendered image, something like that. Something along those lines. So basically, you take a 3D picture, right, kind of like a skybox, and then you kind of take this color information and then you put it into the scene here. So by default, they have one that you can use. There's more of these that you can find online. I'm just going to pick this one to start with. And you can see how it already brightened up our shadows, right? Looks a little bit better. Under all lights, there's an option for color, right? So under our skylight, we could change the color a little bit if we needed to. We have an option that says affects world, so it's basically toggling it on and off. We have an option that says cast shadows. You're like, well, why would a light not cast shadows? That doesn't make sense in the real world. Well, unfortunately, this is not the real world. This is a virtual world. So sometimes we have to fake things to get the kind of result that we're looking for. So we do have an option for that. Let's see. Down here, there's options for ray tracing. Right now, I think this is more of an experimental feature. Ray tracing is really cool technology that's very, very, very new to the gaming industry, or gaming technology. So we're not going to mess a whole lot with that because it's just not ready in this particular version yet. I think we're on, let's see, 4.22. Yeah. I don't think it's in here yet. But yeah, see all these lights, right? They have the same things. The color, affects world, cast shadows. And then we also have something called intensity. So this is the maximum illumination from this light, like how bright is it? And this is measured in lux. So I think I guess that's an actual lighting term. I'm actually not sure. This used to be just an arbitrary number a while back. I think I changed that recently. But you can see if I adjust the brightness, right, the intensity. If I turn it all the way down, right, it says 0. It's going to slowly get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. That's actually something called, adaptive lighting, something like that. That's a post-process that we can change, so you decide how far it goes. It's kind of like walking out of a movie theater, right? It's really dark inside and your eyes slowly adjust to it. I'm going to set this back at 10. Something really cool here that we have is the temperature. This is really neat. You give it a number that's based in Kelvin, if y'all remember from science class. Kelvin is another one of the temperature measurements. So you've got Fahrenheit, you've got Celsius, and then you've got Kelvin. So if I turn on use temperature, 6,500 Kelvin is basically just white light. And then if I pull it down, right, we start getting into like a not very hot flame, right? Fire, somewhere in here. And then once you start getting this way, it starts turning more blue, and that's like really hot. So if you ever look at, a campfire or whatever, or stove, look down towards the bottom, you see kind of like the blue flames. That's the stuff that's the really hot. So if you want to get a little bit more accurate lighting, you can put in a temperature if it's something based in the real world. And if not, you want to adjust it by hand, you can do that with this light color over here. You have the red, green, and blue values. Let's see, what else? We have the source angle and the source soft angle. So this basically just kind of adjusts how the light looks and kind of bends it a little bit. I think a better example would be doing a point light here. So these point lights, they go inside of a sphere, right? I'm going to turn off this one. So if I kind of move it around, right? Anything that's inside of the sphere is going to get a little bit of influence depending on how far it is away from the center, right? And this one has shadows turned on, so you can see shadows behind these objects here, right? And then we have the source radius, so I think that might stretch it with, let's see. There we go. So you can stretch some of these parts, right? So it's probably going to illuminate a little bit more right here, kind of a hot spot. So if I put it right here, see how it's adjusting the hot spot in the middle a little bit. So you have options for that, and you have something called source length. Oh, I'm wrong one. Source length, there we go. This will actually adjust it like a fluorescent light. So let's say you took this and you rotate it like that. Put it up here. Then you have a little bit of a fluorescent light going on. You can see it kind of stretch from the center out to the side, so it's kind of like one long capsule of light. Lots of different things you can mess around with to get what you're looking for. Same stuff with temperature, affects world, right? Cast shadows. Shadows in video games, even though we've come a long way since games that they actually like textured the shadows into the environment. There weren't any actual lights in the game. You know, to save on performance, right? So we do that sometimes, especially for games that are real time. Meaning, or real-time lighting, meaning they don't have, we don't bake the lighting information onto the environment itself. So, if this is running and I never bake the lighting, to save on performance, I might want to think about setting cast shadows to be turned off. Another thing you can change up here is something called mobility. So right now, all lights start as stationary. So it's a stationary light will only have its shadowing and bounce lighting from static geometry baked by the light mass. The light mass. And then, it can't move. Allows for partial baked lighting. So if something's moving nearby it, it will probably cast a shadow. But it puts any light maps onto the environment, their textures, if they're not moving. So when it says static, it's referring to these objects that are not moving at all. So if I have my character running around here, it'll probably draw shadows and lighting information on that character, right? But these will be baked in, right? And then static is fully baked lighting. This doesn't cast any real-time shadows, right, when things are moving around. This is the fastest rendering type, so this is the most performance, or the most quality, right? The most performance. These will get you better real-time results, so dynamic things. So the further you go to the right, you're losing performance. But things can be more dynamic. So you kind of have to decide, which option do I need? Now, in Level Design 1, I know a bunch of people had this issue here, right? So let's say I have a stationary light there, and then I have another one over here, and then another one, right? Oh, see what happened? There's too many lights here that are overlapping their bounds. And then this one basically turns off, says there's too many lights that are close together, right? So a way to fix that is moving lights away from each other so that they don't overlap. So if I move this guy over here, see it's a little bit better now. Another option is to remove lights, right? And the last option is to change this mobility setting here. So if I'm having an issue where all these three lights are kind of overlapping, right? Like that, I could select the one that's having the problem, and I could change it to either static or movable. That's another way to fix that.
When you say they're overlapping, you're talking about the source is emitting, which is emitting the light, and not just making go smaller?
You could make them smaller too. Yeah,
Would that fix it?
I think so. Let's try it. Okay, so this one doesn't like. So it's okay there. Oh yeah, see it? See it change like that? Yeah. So you can scale it. That's what this attenuation radius is here for. So yes, you can scale it. Thanks for reminding me, John. Yeah, attenuation radius is the same as scaling it. The scale here should stay 111. This is how far the light goes, essentially, right? The bounds.
Well, I was just thinking, what if I don't want to get rid of my lights?
Huh?
I said, I was just thinking, what if I don't want to get rid of my lights?
What if you don't want to get rid of your lights? Yeah. When you build the lighting, when you have your light mass importance volume, and it bounces around a whole bunch of times, you might realize that things actually might be a little bit too bright. Because what you see right here isn't always what ends up baking,
Correct.
right? So, but yeah.
I noticed that last semester when we did the Unreal Tournament maps, I had one of my hallways rigged with a bunch of red lights. I kept running into that issue.
Oh yeah.
It's a big one.
Oof. All right. So I got my lights here, right? Instead of bookmark, control 1 or control 2, something like that. Control whatever number you want, so you can kind of keep the same camera angle. And I'm going to go ahead and save the scene just in case. I'm going to call this lighting test. Okay, so we have our direction light, couple of point lights, and our skylight. So I'm going to go ahead and change the colors of these just a little bit. That looks pretty cool. Let's see, put a camera right, let's see, right there. Alright, so we've got our lights in the scene, and they have shadows all turned on now, right? Now what I want to do before I do anything else, I actually want to go over here to the modes panel, and I want to type in post process value. I'm going to drag one of these into the map. This is actually something that you do pretty much after everything else. But to show you about that one setting, oh, I said adaptive. It's actually called exposure. Excuse me. We want to change that just a little bit. So it's in the scene right now. If my camera flies into it, right, it's going to take whatever effects I have down in here, right? It's kind of like a filter. And then if I leave it, it'll take those effects away. So for example, let's say the bloom in here is really high, like I'm underwater. Like that. When I leave, see it goes away. So that's what a post-process volume does. It's basically a filter. You can add as many of these as you like to your map. There are options for if they overlap, like which ones take priority. And there's an option to say, hey, I want to put this over my entire map, but I don't really want to stretch it every time I add new parts of the map. Right? So let's say I keep building over here. It's like, I have to go back and readjust this again. If you click on it, down at the bottom of the details panel, there's an option that says infinite extent, or it used to be called unbound, I guess. So if I turn it on, it'll apply that setting everywhere, regardless if you're inside the box or not. So now I'm going to go back up to this setting here for exposure. And then we have a min and max brightness. This is something that I like to do just because I do not care for auto exposure. You can leave this on if you'd like, but this is where the setting is. I'm going to change these both to 1 for now. And then somewhere there's a bias. Here we go. Exposure compensation. Okay, they renamed it. So basically this is like an offset of how bright your light is and the entire scene. So if I set this at -1, right, then see it gets really dark with what I have already, and if I change it to 5, see it gets overblown. So I'm going to leave it at 0 and just know that if I go and change this, right, that's going to affect all of my lighting. So it's important to kind of set these values first for like, hey, this is my baseline. Alright, so we've got the directional light, we've got the skylight, post-process volumes, and our, RGB colors here, right? Now what I want to do is add something in called a light mass importance volume. Y'all remember this from doing the Unreal Tournament stuff? Maybe? So this is telling Unreal, hey, I would like to focus all of your oomph, right? Focus all of your efforts onto building high quality lighting in this area. So I'm going to put this in here. Make sure it surrounds my map. The important parts. Hit save. Hmm?
Is that one of those ones come on there by default?
The importance volume?
In the Unreal Tournament?
No, that was not in there by default. You have to drag it into the map. I think it should. If you start out with one of the template maps, so something like this, right? If you create a new level, it might have one in there. I'm not actually sure. If you start with like one of the temple, like third-person example map, right? Those usually have one in there that you can modify. Alright, so I've got this in here now. So say, hey, Unreal, I'd like you to focus all of your light building quality right here. And then one more thing I needed to change, or at least show you where these options are before we hit build, is settings and then world settings. So in the world settings, they kind of, you can change stuff like the game mode and the kill Z. If the players fall off the map or something falls off the map, they'll get destroyed and whatnot. The overall physics. But they do have an option here for not VR. I was looking at VR. Light mass. So this is basically controlling the settings on this box right here in the world. There's a whole bunch of things in here. It's a little bit daunting. Something that I always like to turn on is ambient occlusion, right? So you can override whatever. There's ambient occlusion on this post-processing box here. That's kind of faking it. This one actually kind of bakes it into the scene. So I'm going to turn on use ambient occlusion. And then there's a section for number of indirect lighting bounces, right? And number of skylighting bounces. So I've seen people put this number at 100 before. It takes a while, a little bit longer. It's basically, if you take one of these lights, right, so it goes, bang, bang, and then maybe bounces off the cone or something. That's 3. So imagine 100, you're getting a lot more bounces, kind of simulating like a little bit of real life. So back to John's questions, like, well, I don't want to delete the light if I don't have to, right, because it gets one of those red X's. Well, depending on what your number of bounces are, right, you may not need it in the end, because one light actually can bright up quite a bit. Alright, so I'm going to leave the number of bounces right now at 3. We have ambient occlusion turned on. And then this environment color, this is kind of like the background color, right? So I'm going to leave it at black right now, and then we'll see what it looks like. Got all my things in here. Fantastic. There's a build option right here. This will build geometry, navigation, and lighting for you. So if you want to build everything, you can do that. There's also this little drop-down arrow, which I'm sure everybody's seen before. This is where we go and build navigation, right? Build paths. There's build geometry, and then up here is build lighting. So you can set what your lighting quality is going to be at. I usually recommend preview to start with because it doesn't take as long. You can make adjustments and then you can kind of bump it up, and then when you're ready to ship, you need to do a production build. So I'm going to build lighting only. And then this will probably come up as Windows security alert says, hey, Swarm agent wants to access some of these things. So just click allow.
I remember that. I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, the Swarm agent that's building the lighting data, and you'll see it down here in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. So right now it's at 0%, and now it's at 100%. That was pretty quick. All right. So this is the result that we got. All right. That looks pretty good. And you can see in the top left-hand corner of our viewport that option that says lighting needs to be rebuilt, and red text has gone away. All right. So this looks good. Couple of options as far as how you wanting to view your scene. The first view mode is lit, right? So you can see all of your lights. You can see all of your objects. Unlit basically turns lighting off. You've got wireframe, so this is no lighting at all. This is just showing the geometry that makes up all of the art in your map. Detail lighting, which is really cool. So these two right here are really handy for lighting, because you basically turn off all the textures and you can see what's actually moving around in the scene, right? So detail lighting, you can't really see a difference probably between these two, just a little bit. Detail lighting will all show normal map information, so if you have surfaces that are really bumpy, it'll catch that in the detail. Let's see if I have any materials in here. I don't think I do. Starter content. Maybe I do. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Cobblestone smooth. Concrete tiles. Let me throw that in here. So that's what it looks like with the concrete tiles, right? Is this a static mesh? Yes, it is. So maybe I'll put moss on there and gold. And we'll put some metal and maybe some of that. There we go. So yeah, that's what it looks like with the materials on it. Unlit. Detail lighting, see the normal maps here are coming out. And then regular lighting only. Alright. And then there's other options down here for optimization, which become really important, Actually, this is important all the time. Usually some of this stuff gets pushed off to the very end of a project, but optimization basically means you want to take things and make them more efficient, or make it run better. So if your levels are really sluggish, right? It may be physics, it may be unbuilt lighting, the texture density, you have too many objects with really high textures, right? Too many animations, effects, could be a lot of things, right? So this kind of helps you kind of go through those options. So light complexity, usually for the most part, green and blue, those kind of things are okay. If it starts getting like to red, pink, that's not so good. Light map density. This is just showing the light map for each of these objects. Has anybody taken the 3D modeling class, or is taking it right now? No? Have they touched on light maps yet at all, or UVs? You did a little bit? Okay. So when you have an object in Unreal, right, you have its textures, which are put into a UV map. kind of like a horizontal and vertical axis, and then you put them on the object. You also have something called a light map, which is kind of the same thing but for lighting information. So to get those looking good, they kind of have to adjust the quality of the UVs and where they're at as in that image, right? So this is a way to kind of view those and see what kind of quality you're going to get. So this one, it looks like it has a lot more, these are a lot denser than some of these things down here. Shader complexity, things that are over here are good, right? This says good, bad, extremely bad, so you don't really want anything over on this end. And then there's some other options in here that you can kind of look through, but lighting only and detail lighting are your friend when you're putting lighting in your scene, right? And it's important to look at some of the same camera angles over and over to see what kind of results you're getting. Another option is to go into, let's say, full screen, right? And then over here in the top left-hand corner, there's a little drop-down arrow. And then there's an option here. It says high-resolution screenshot. So I'll take a screenshot for you. And you can drag a box by clicking this, or take the entire screen with this one. And then down here it says, hey, here's your screenshot. And it puts it into the project under saved screenshots. And there's my screenshot. So if you want to see the difference between your different lighting settings, like, hey, what if this was at nighttime, or what if this is during the day, or what if this was a little bit more foggy and whatnot, you can kind of change something and see how it looks. So I actually think this looks a little bit dark, so I'm going to brighten it up, and I think that's probably because of the materials that we added. Alright, now here's something interesting. You noticed I'm changing my intensity and nothing's changing, right? What do you think that is? It needs to be built again. So it was at 10. I'm going to change it to 15. And hit build. There we go. So that brightened it up a decent amount. There we go. Same thing. Let's go full screen. And I want to take a screenshot. Go back to that directory. Oh, you can't go back and forth with this Windows mode, can you? See, there's a little bit of a difference. So basically, you kind of have to go back and forth and see what things look like. And it's oh, you know what? I actually have that turned off. That helps. Alright, so this was turned off all along. It still looks kind of cool though. What's this look like at 1? Okay, there we go. So it will update, but I'll have the preview option in here. That's my fault. Didn't realize that was turned off. Alright, so I'm going to hit build again. Alright, there it goes. Let's go full screen. And I'm going to hit G to hide all of these things in here. Go into game mode and then take another screenshot. And then we can go take a look at it here. So I'm going to get rid of this middle one. Open up. There we go. See the difference between the two? So this is without a skylight, or without the directional light. And this is with it turned on. So you've got quite a bit of lighting just from the skylight. Just kind of taking that cube map, kind of bouncing around everywhere, and then our other lights in the scene. When we add the directional one in, it actually kind of washes it out a little bit. So depending on what kind of atmosphere or mood you're setting, you can kind of adjust these as you need to. We also have the spotlight here. I'm going to change this to movable so I don't get that on there. Spotlight only shines in a cone. There's the attenuation radius, so how far it goes, right? And then the inner and outer cone angle. Same stuff with temperature, affects world, cast shadows, intensity, and light color. One really cool thing about spotlights in particular is that you can change something called an IES profile, IES texture. This basically just controls what the light looks like. So I don't think we have any here by default. If you go onto the Epic Games or the Epic Games Marketplace or whatever, Unreal Marketplace, you might be able to find some of these for free or elsewhere online. They look pretty cool. Let's see if I can show you what they look like. Mm-hmm. If I could spell IES, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so they make your lights look really neat. Really neat stuff. So that's what those are. And then don't know if we looked at light functions yet. We may have done that in a previous video a couple weeks ago. A light function is basically if you want it to get something like to strobe or like a broken light, something like that, kind of flickering. You can make a material, right, and then categorize it as a light function and apply it into here, and then the light will take on whatever values you have in the material. So if it's strobing or something, you can put that into here, and that's what it'll look like. Let's see, what else have we not talked about yet? Direction light, point light, skylight, spotlight, light mass importance volume, post-process volume. I think the only other thing is visual effects. So we already got one of them in here, the post-process volume. For things that have metallic surfaces on them, right? They may look kind of weird when you put that material in the world, especially when it's needing some sort of what's called a reflection capture. So like, hey, tell me what kind of things are bouncing around in the scene, and then I will absorb that into my material, right? Take the information. So there's a sphere and box reflection capture. So you see if I take this into the map, right? You see the reflection has kind of changed a little bit on the metallic surfaces. So it's like copper here. Yeah, or gold, I guess that's what it is. And then there's another one here. What is this? Metal burnished steel? Yeah. So adding this reflection capture here. See, these will update here, these materials. It's like, hey, I'd like to capture what's inside this box. So right now they look a little bit funky without it. So I want to put this in here and make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Okay. And then there's brightness here, and then the same thing with the cube map. So this is kind of what gets reflected. And these you usually want to put at eye level, like if you have any metallic surfaces. In your game, put these kind of like the character's eye level. That way it's like, oh, if I'm this tall, in the game, and I look at something, the reflections will kind of mirror back to what I would see in real life. We also have exponential height fog, which is very cool. Throw this into your map, right? gives a little bit of a spooky vibe, right? Did anybody ever play? Was it Silent Hill? Did y'all play that? A little bit of a horror game. I think that was right, Roderick. Silent Hill. You see them? Yeah, they couldn't render very far. They could only render to like. Yeah, so when this is like stuff would kind of appear, right, as you get closer to it. So like, yeah, they couldn't render that far. So that's why they had fog and whatnot. We can render a little bit further than that now, but we still have the all these cool options here for changing how it looks and whatnot. So there's a density which is very sensitive. It's on 1 right now, and see it's covering up most of the scene right here. You can adjust the color over here. You can mess with that for a minute. And then there's options over here for max opacity, start distance. So like you can see the line of like, hey, this is where it starts, this is where it stops. And then there's a fall off. And then this feature is very cool. This is very expensive though. It's called volumetric fog. So this is like realistic fog. So like somebody driven out kind of later at night on one of these nights the past couple months it's rained a whole lot, you can kind of see like the mist in the air, right, when it's interacting with like street lights and whatnot. That's what volumetric fog does. It looks really cool. So if you were to put, let's say, a light in here, let me change it to 0.5. So can you see that kind of cone that ends up there, right? That's actually based off of the fog, right? Old games used to fake that by making a cone and putting like a transparent texture, kind of blends to make it look like that, a light cone. Now it's just you turn that setting on. This is still expensive though, so be careful about that. You can use it. And scenes that are probably baked, I would not recommend that for if you're working on a project that has real-time lighting. You don't bake anything, I wouldn't recommend that. At least not for a while. Their tech has got to get a little bit more optimized until then. Let's see what else. Visual effects, exponential height fog, atmospheric fog. This is more for the background. I'm actually going to turn off my exponential height fog here. Yeah, see, this is a little bit more for the background here. So if you go and create like a new level, right, and you do the default, it'll give you one of these. It'll give you directional light, a floor, a player start, and then a sky sphere. And all those kind of combined together kind of gets that new template look, right? So this one you have options for changing kind of like where a virtual sun or moon is, right? Fog multiplier in the background. Like the difference between, see, this is kind of the sky, and then there's a somewhat distinctive line, and then this is kind of like the background and the horizon, right? The ground. They have a bunch of settings there for that. And then you can link it up with your direction light in your scene if you add in the sky sphere. So I'm going to type that in here. Sky sphere. This one is actually built into Unreal. So if I dragged it in here, right? I'm going to put it at 0, 0, 0. Let's good rule of thumb to make sure that all of your things like lights and or at least the directional lights, that doesn't really matter where it is in the scene. Skylight, it doesn't matter its position. You kind of have those things kind of in the same spot, kind of grouped together. So I'm going to move these over here a little bit. I have all these little editor billboard icons, which you can change the size of if you need to. There's an option down at the bottom of the details panel for each of those. Let me click on my sky here. So there's an option here. It says refresh material, right? And it looks like a Boolean, but it doesn't really do anything. The reason for this is because you can actually hook up your directional light into the sky, and it'll update the background depending on its angle. So it's like, hey, if it's pointed straight down, that's probably noon. If it's facing like 90 degrees to the west or to the east, right, it's going to look like this. It's going to have kind of a sunset vibe. And if you face it up, you're going to have nighttime. So I'm going to use a little search here and find my directional light. And then if I click the refresh, right, you'll see it update a little bit here. So we've got the sky and whatnot. This looks like the default template map now. So I'm going to go ahead and save real quick. Let's say I take my directional light here. And let's say I rotate it. And I'm turning on the local rotation instead of using the world rotation. So see, it's actually kind of rotated at a funny angle. So that's world. That's local. So you can change it by clicking this, or you can press Control and then tilde. It's the button underneath the escape key to switch between those. Do what now?
Oh my god, thank you.
See there already. Control tilde, yes. Or you can click this here. I like the hotkey a little bit better. But so if I do that, you can see, hey, this is the direction that the angle, or this is the way the light's going, right? So if I rotate this, right, to make it like noon, and then I go back to my skybox, click over here, right, and then click refresh, you'll see the sun is now kind of going straight down, right, instead of being at an angle. And then if I, let's say, oh, it's like, we're kind of approaching golden hour here, right? Like that, kind of the long shadows. Click on the background, the sky sphere, hit refresh. So it kind of updates, kind of getting those golden hour vibes. And then the cool one is if you go straight up, we're going to start seeing some stars in here at some point. A little bit like that. There we go. Yeah, so we've got some stars going on here. I'm going to turn off the... Oh, it's already turned off. Kind of a hot spot right there, yeah. Oh, that's because the sun is over there. So, yeah, wherever you rotate your directional light that's connected to the skybox, hit refresh and it'll update the background for you. It also has some options for sun brightness, cloud speed, star brightness. So see, I've got some stars here, right? They're just not really bright. This is not in the deep in the heart of Texas, I guess. But we can make it like that if we wanted to. Star brightness is 0.1, so there we go. Ooh. Very nice. Alright. So there's a lot more stars now because we changed the brightness here. And then let's say, hey, actually want to go change it back to this time of day. Refresh. right? Stars go away. Here are the clouds. You've got the cloud speed and brightness over here. I guess they're opacity. So no clouds, decent amount of clouds, a lot of clouds, right? And then there's an option that says color is determined by the sun. So if you don't want it to change the color, but you want to move it around where the sun is coming from, your directional light. You've got that. More sun, horizon, zenith, cloud color settings. I'll change the background. Let me change sun brightness. Wait, no, cloud opacity. That's what it is. It was 0.7. There we go. Hit save again. So something that we discovered while working on one of our games is that we had lit a couple of our maps, right? And they're real time. The maps are kind of generated procedurally. So we have mainly one directional light in the scene and a skylight to kind of brighten up the dark areas. And we found that it's really hard to see the players. The environment looks good, but the players are too dark. And unfortunately, we don't want to go through all of the character materials and then artificially brighten them up. That doesn't make sense. So what we ended up doing is this. If I take in, let's say, a character here, or whatever model, let me find, where's the mannequin? Here we go. Say we have our mannequin here, right? And let me change the brightness of the directional light just a little bit so you can see the difference. I'm going to change it to, let's change it to 1. Right, so mannequin, you can see him. He's not overly bright though, right? Let's say, hey, I want this to stand out in my scene. And like, okay, well, we could add a point light to him or a directional light or something like that. In Diablo, they kind of have the little, kind of like fake lighting, kind of shining on top, and everywhere else is dark. There's a really cool feature in here called lighting channels. And there's 3 of them that you can use. They start at 0, and then there's 1, and then there's 2. So right now, everything on here is set to channel 0. So if I click on my mannequin, right, and then I go down here under the lighting tab, every actor in your scene, anything that you drag in has a lighting tab. It'll say cast shadow, right? There might be a couple of other options depending on what type of actor it is. But there's a little drop down arrow right here. If I scroll down, there's a section that says lighting channels. I'm going to open it up, and you can see that he's on channel 0, like everything else is in the game, right? If I turn off channel 0, he doesn't get any lighting, right? That's kind of like the opposite of if making an emissive material. It's like, hey, lighting, it doesn't affect us because it's so bright. This is saying like, hey, none of the lights that are in the scene affect this this actor. So I'm going to leave channel 0 turned on. I'm also going to turn on channel 1, right? Nothing happened yet, but what I can do is take my directional light and then duplicate it, and then we'll call this character light, and then change its lighting down here. Let me find it. There we go. Too many components. So we're going to change the direction light here for our character. I'm going to turn off 0, right? I'm going to turn on 1. You see that? I'll make it a little bit brighter. There we go. So here's channel 0. right? Everything gets brighter. Channel 1, only things that are on channel 1 get brighter, right? So if for some reason you have certain entities or actors in your game that need special lighting, right? So you can recognize them a little bit better. You can see them. The player can see them a little bit better. This is more of a gameplay and visibility and experience thing more than it is like a real life thing. If I have a direction light here and I'm pointing it at everybody, but I said, oh, actually, I only want it to shine on Kenny. Like, that doesn't really make sense in real life. So this is just an option for how you want your lighting to look, right? So, yeah, lighting channels are very cool. If you need an extra boost on your characters or something in the scene to highlight it, you take one of your directional lights or any other light, set it on a different channel, right? And you're good to go. I could do the same thing with a spotlight shining down on the character, and only he would get illuminated, right? And let's see. Yeah, the last thing I think is basically the I guess we could have done this at the beginning, but the basics of lighting in general is that you have a main light, you have a fill light, and you have a rim light. Right? So if we look at our character here, right, you notice why I put those other lights in the scene? We've got this light here coming from this angle, right? And then we have our main light kind of shining down at him. And then there's, if I move the blue light over here, you might be able to see just a little bit around the edges, right? So that would be considered a rim light. So I'm going to go ahead and hit build again, see what this looks like. If you've ever taken a photography class, they might talk about this a little bit, about lighting. Or like a film class. Right? So see, we've got main light, which is kind of a whitish color, right? Whitish blue. Filling up some of these areas over here. On one side is the main light. This is the fill light, and then kind of around the edges here, got the rim light. Now it's kind of hard to have that set up for every single scenario in your game, where the player is gonna like, hey, at this angle when he's fighting this, you don't always have that control. If it's something cinematic, you definitely can have control over that, right? So a set piece, something you want to focus your attention on. Remember, lights kind of draw our eyes. You can use that to draw emphasis on a building or somewhere the player needs to go, or a character, whatever you need to. But you'll notice it when it's not there. I don't know if we've ever talked about that previously, but good design goes unnoticed. Fantastic design gets recognized. Bad design is very noticed, right? So at least you can get your work to go somewhat unnoticed. People are like, yeah, it looks good, right? The next quality bar, right, is that fantastic tier. Like, ooh, this looks really good. We want to try to avoid something looks off, right? Because just naturally, we know what looks good and what doesn't. We don't always know why, but that's part of the process while we kind of dive into some of these subjects, right? So if you have the chance to do these kind of things in your map, your project that you're working on, please do. If you have time. If you go into another project dev and says we need somebody to light the map, be like, hey, I can do it because you know how to do it now, right? It just takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. There's a lot of tutorials out there online and YouTube and whatnot, so you can definitely watch those. They'll show you some cool things like global illumination, and some of the newer ones will show you how to do ray tracing and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you want your game to play good, right? And you want it to look good. And lighting is one of those things that will really make it stand out. Alrighty. Are there any questions about what we went over today? Or any of the things that we added into the scene? No? Oh, okay.
When you're able to change how the lighting is for the skeleton mesh of the mannequin, but I can't seem to figure out how to change the lighting for when my character gets spawned in. Because I want the background to be kind of dark and only be lit by accent lighting, but I can't see them very well. And whenever I use directional lighting, it lights up the area too much. So when you hit this channel thing that makes the character light up, I'm just trying to figure out how to do that.
Oh, yeah. So if I click on my character light here, right?
Yeah.
It's just another directional light. Down here under the lighting tab, or the light tab, there's a little drop down arrow at the bottom. Something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so scroll down and then you see the lighting channels.
Yeah.
So I turned off channel 0 because that's everything.
Right.
And turn on channel 1.
Okay.
And then the character, we're going to turn off channel 0.
Yeah, but my
And turn on
character
channel 1.
isn't, I can't access my character. It's my character.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Yeah.
he's in a blueprint. I got you. Same thing. You just got to open the blueprint.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you were asking.
I didn't word it very
No, you're good.
right.
No, you're good. Okay, yeah. So in here, right? You just want to select your character and do the same exact thing. Go find the light tab, lighting. Yeah, lighting channels.
So it would be the same thing. I have to go to the actual blueprint.
Yeah, you have to go to the actual blueprint.
Okay.
Yeah, and select the meshes. Yeah, that you want to change the channels for. And you can decide whether you want to keep the other channel turned on or off. Like if it gets too bright, maybe make it a little bit dimmer and then leave the other one off. So it just kind of depends on what you want it to do.
Okay.
Now, if you turn off channel 0, then other lights in the scene won't affect the player unless they're on that same channel as well.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say if I change this to channel 1, turn off 0, right? Anything that needs to affect him also needs to be on channel 1. So that means any spotlights that you put in the scene, right? Some of those flickering ones that you have,
Yeah.
you'd have to change those to 1 too.
Those to affect, yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of just have to find the balance.
You have to find a balance, and that,
0 and then the directional lighting in channel 1.
or it could be a spotlight too, maybe.
There are a lot of spotlights that he walks under that I still want to be affected by, but I just want him to be able to be seen the whole time.
Yeah, so you could adjust that directional light. So the brightness, or maybe add a spotlight that's kind of facing towards him. That would be a reason to turn off cast shadows, right? Because somebody filming him, is this on a camera or something, right? Or is this kind of like an ambient? You don't notice it as much, right? It's there just because reasons. Yeah, there's an option under the light tab. Yeah. I will show you guys an example of this and the lighting channels in action. So, let's see, where is it? Time ago, the after we discovered lighting channels, it starts to look more like this. Dark.
Suppressing fire!
Shadow a little bit, like over here. Make it bright. All right, any other questions? Alrighty. There is a really cool website. You may have heard it before. It's called worldofleveldesign.com. He has a series on doing lighting, or at least there's a cool section of it for doing lighting. See if I can find it on the front page here. I'm not sure how far down it is. Here we go. So he has a project here called the Corridor Project, I believe that's what it's called. He kind of goes through the process like, hey, we're going to create all these static meshes, right? We're going to do the BSP blockout and kind of flesh out the space, right? And then make it look really nice with some good textures and then some really good lighting. So if you get a chance, you want to learn a little bit more about this stuff, you can go through this series here. He'll kind of walk you through it. I think this one's talking about the actual, pipes. But see, there's two different lighting scenarios here, right? So there's one scenario, and this is more of a like a nighttime scenario. So pretty cool. Where is that option? Not sure where it is exactly. Is it this one? No. There is a place where you can actually change your lighting scenario. So like, hey, I want to use this one over another one. I don't remember where that viewport is though, or that tab. It's in here somewhere. Layers. No. Yeah, I'm not sure where it is. But there's an option for you to be able to change, like, hey, I want this lighting scenario, and then in this instance, and then you can flip it and it'll change it to the other one. I'm not sure where that is exactly. It's been a little while. But yeah, this is like anything else. You want to get good at it, you got to practice. So get good, yep. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and close this one out, and
Said it was called World of Level Design.
worldofleveldesign.com, yeah.